And as I mentioned here, I'm standing on the number 13 steps, 13 Randolph Crescent. This is an extension to the new town, so it's a mid-century, mid-1900s addition to the new town. Remember we mentioned the new town was started in the 18th century, and addition and addition and addition, it started to grow and grow and grow. And we're standing on Randolph Crescent. This used to be where the French Institute used to be, or the French Consulate. That has now moved up to a much bigger building up in the old town opposite St Giles Cathedral. But the reasons I wanted to start here was because we always like to pull out people of history and people who have made a complete change or added to the change and social development of Scotland. We've talked before about the women pioneers of the Victorian period who entered into Edinburgh University for medicine. They were the first women who ever entered in, one of them being Sophia Jex-Blake. We've talked about her before. There's 4 women who lived in this building here. They were born in Glasgow, but 4 of them came over here. They were left a lot of money by their father. They were great philanthropists, and they were social reformers, and they were known as the Stevenson sisters. And we have a plaque here for the Stevenson sisters. This is the Women of Achievement. And it was good to see these all over Edinburgh. Now, who were they? Well, there were 4 sisters. They were spinsters, which is such a horrible word. Let's say they were decided to be single, and they lived in the middle of the end to the end of the Victorian period, right up to the beginning of the 1900s. They were all for women suffrage, so they were suffragists, not suffragettes as such, but suffragists. Great philanthropists, and they sponsored. Well, there's 4 of them. There's Eliza, Louisa, there was Jane, and there was Flora. And they were all politically and socially active. Flora in particular was more active in terms of women's education, and she used her money to sponsor the development of courses at Edinburgh University to open up for women. She lobbied for them, and she was very successful, and she used her influence and her money to sponsor the pioneer women who went into study medicine at Edinburgh University. Flora has got a primary school named after her, so to commemorate Flora, we have the Flora Stevenson Primary School, which is actually only a couple of hundred yards from where Mike lives as well. So we commemorate her there. Her sister, Louisa, was also a social reformer, and she was more politically involved in terms of active in the suffragist movement, and all 4 of them together were active. They had meetings in here and were happily able to change the way society thought. They were also worked a lot with the poor, to bring in education to the poor. So all round there were great 4 women. So I just want to make a mark for the Stevenson sisters here in Randolph Crescent in Edinburgh. Let's take a wee walk down. I mentioned that this was the site of the French Consulate. We're right next door. We have the Consulate of the Irish Republic. Now, we've done a lot about Scots Gaelic, and here we have Irish Gaelic here as well. Very closely related languages. So we've got the Irish Gaelic on top, and English at the bottom, of course. So this tour, we're going to try and do a wee bit of a top and tail. So we'll start with, so keep in mind the Stevenson sisters, and we'll talk later on about another guy from the same period, and that will finish off our tour. So we're going to be going across the Dean Bridge, talking about the bridge itself, talking about the architecture, and talking about some of the people in the area, trying to bring this part alive for you as well. Now I want to show you this architecture. Now remember, on this side of the building here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, we've actually got 5 floors, or 5 stories to these buildings, but they're actually built on a cliff. Of course, the Irish Republic has been independent from Great Britain since the 1920s itself. And across the street you've got, again, wonderful townhouses over here. Now this is a really important road here in Edinburgh. This is called Queensferry Road, and this used to be the main route from the city north down to Queensferry to get your goods and chattels across the river and up north. I just think the architecture here is just something quite spectacular. But we're going to take you across the street.
So welcome again. We are going to cover this house now, and this house, you can see by the architecture, it is quite old. It goes back originally to the 17th century, about the 1680s, and it was a toll house at one point, would be the place where the toll keeper would collect money for people for crossing the bridge or crossing the access across here. It was also an inn, and its history of an inn maybe predates its time as a toll house, because it was in existence before the Dean Bridge came into being. Now, it's a concoction, is the best way really to describe it, of different styles with a lot of ornament and detail, which many people will miss sometimes if they're walking past it. But I'm going to try and engage you with some of that stuff that people could miss.
Some translation.
Because that's what we do. That's what Joan White's tours do. We want to have some of the hidden areas. Now, if you look up at the chimney pot stack there, you will see gargoyles to begin with, and they remind me a wee bit of Harry Potter, something out of Harry Potter, really. And you can see the stonework is very old in places as we pan down a bit here. And this property fell into the hands of one James Stewart. Now, he took over in the 19th century, and he was a very enterprising person because he had horses and carriages that would transport people from Edinburgh across to South Queensferry and back. So his offices, his business was located here where this house was. And he began to accrue more and more wealth. In fact, more wealth than perhaps you would expect from a cabbie. So I don't know what sort of other interests he had, but he was actually able to engage quite a well-known architect called Graham Fairley in the 19th century, and he had lots of whims, did James Stewart, in the way he wanted his house to be. So it was extended downwards about 6 stories down into the gap that you can't actually see. So it's a much larger house today. It's got 6 bedrooms, would you believe? And it's got many staircases, and some of the staircases don't lead anywhere, which is something to do with a confection, a kind of lapse into dreams and history that the James Stewart wanted to have, very much an extension of his personality. So it's full of different details. Now, if you look again above the window, there is an arched pediment. Now, a pediment is a decorative feature, usually that is over a doorway or window, and over this window here is a judge. If you were to look carefully, you would see a judge seated on a throne of justice, holding the actual scales of justice in there. So I don't know if you're actually seeing that or not. It's quite a lot of detail to get there, but that was taken from an older house, which was demolished, certainly by the 19th century, called Dean House. And the Dean estates where the Dean Cemetery are were actually the estates of the Dean House that no longer existed. So we'll move on a little bit around the corner so that I can show you.
The word Bellbrae.
Yep.
Brae is this good Scots word for hill.
Hill, yeah.
You always went down the Brae, you never went up the Brae. I never
down the Brae, yeah.
You never went up the Brae, you always went down the Brae.
Yes. It's great Scots words. And I'm going to move around the corner. We're going to be quite careful here. I think we'll keep close to the house, Joe, so that we can see some more of the detail. And
well, this also used to be, for a long time, it was an antique store as well.
Yeah, because quite a notable character came here in the 1950s, a man called Basil Skinner. And Basil Skinner was a historian, and he was a conservationist. He didn't want architecture to suffer or interesting old buildings to be taken down. And today, that's very much an issue in Edinburgh as we see big modern hotels spring up. And he was a member of an association called the Coburn Association. And that today is still evident in terms of conservation and keeping this city of Edinburgh a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So Basil Skinner he was a bit of an eccentric guy. He was a very early achiever because at the age of 30 he became assistant curator at the National Gallery of Portrait Gallery of Scotland, which was quite an achievement. And he had a lot to do with the formation of the Hopeton Trust. And Joe and I often guide people to Hopeton House, which is one of the locations of the Outlander. And he was engaged to catalogue the art collection at Hopeton House, and he was a historian, so he was also having quite a sense of humour. He would have parties in here, and the parties would be described as a party at the house on the bridge. Yeah.
One question, do we know what it's used for now?
Used for now, it's changed hands so many times. The last owner here was Alan Thompson and his family, who had a chain of pubs and hospitality in Edinburgh, but currently it doesn't look too much as if it's occupied, although they're going down 6 stories and there's an access from the garden down below, so who knows, there could be people living in here, but from the top end of the house you don't actually see that.
Above the window here we've got a Latin inscription, Nisi Dominus Frustra. Without God, it's in vain.
Without God, it's in vain.
Comes from the Psalms, and I've said anything you build has to be built with God in mind.
Yes.
There's a very noisy fire engine going to come here in a second. But down here, you talked about the cab office, Mike.
Yeah.
Here we go. Cab office.
The cab office.
Yeah.
You see, this is it. We've got a fire engine passing by at the moment, but such is broadcasting a live tour, but it's full of amazing detail. And if we look up to the left, Joe, just on the wall, you'll see, you know, we were at the Leighton Library and we found out about a cartouche. Cartouche. It's like a medallion or a piece of interest. In this case, this relief standing out here was taken from an older building, okay? And it was one of the mill buildings going back to the early 17th century, which was much older than this house was. Remember, I said this was 1680s. Well, this was from a much older building, and it is actually translated, and it's not translated, it's actually in English, but what it says is, "In the sweat of your face shall you eat bread," because we are going over this bridge that goes over the Dean village, where Joe and I have guided before and have talked about the milling, and the produce, the milled grain, would go to the Baxters of Edinburgh to make bread. So this is what this is all about, and it's connecting the milling of grain with being a godly pursuit. But also, if you look on the left hand side, you'll see a figure, rather a narn with epaulets on it, little buttons on it, holding a corn sheaf. And if you go to the other side, and I don't know if this is male and female, and the one with the buttoned sleeve is the male and the one with the more fancy sleeve is the female, could be, maybe not, is holding a timer, the sands of time. And but it doesn't need to be necessarily that either, because beside that is scales for weighing out the grain. So very much connected with the milling of grain and the production of bread.
And it is dated 1619.
1619, so this long before this building was constructed. Yeah.
Just to ask another question, would this have been a house, because this is a very busy road to the north at the moment, traditionally the traffic from here would have gone down into Dean Village, across the Dean Bridge and back up. I mean, it's a deep, deep glacial valley to go up, and your horse and cart going down there. It would have been difficult to control your goods with the horse and cart as well. Hence the reason for building this bridge as a shortcut to avoid going through the village of Dean.
Yeah, and remember, this house existed here before the Dean Bridge was built.
Yeah.
So just as Joe was saying, Kirkbrae, it's called Kirkbrae House.
Kirkbrae House.
Kirkbrae House. And just down the side of it is today called Bellbrae. And if you went down Bellbrae, you would come to like a ford and you could cross over. So this could still have been collecting tolls even before the advent of this Dean Bridge. Yeah,
But you'd be paying tolls for turnpike roads as well, not necessarily just for bridges.
That's right,
So you would be paying, if you're bringing goods in and out of the city, you'd have to pay your toll in and out of the city.
That's right. Well, Basil was a bit of an eccentric, and he worked for the university, extramural studies, he taught, and on one occasion he experimented to see how many students he could get into a stagecoach. It's like how many.
Into a telephone box.
Yeah, it's like that. How many people you can squeeze into a mini in the 1960s to actually sell the vehicle? So that was something else. We've got lots of fans in Edinburgh. People recognise us when we're doing this. Maybe
the views are quite spectacular.
The view over there, and that is Randolph Cliff that we were talking about earlier when Joe was talking about James Gillespie Graham, who was the architect who developed what was called the Murray Estates, and he was also responsible for the Highland Tolbooth Church up at Castle Hill, which many of you will be familiar with, the big black spire, and he worked with Augustus Pugin on that. If you look down over to the left, you can see the view from the Dean Bridge. So this was 1830s, Thomas Telford, a famous bridge engineer, as well as opening up the Highlands, opening up the economy of Scotland through developing harbours. Thomas Telford was like the Brunel of Scotland.
He was the Colossus of the roads.
Yeah.
There we go. And we're looking at a gorgeous sunset about to develop here, catching the church. So we're going to stand for a while.
You've got to have a head for heights sometimes looking over there. You just have to concentrate on the horizontals rather than
you said that Brunel, you said that Thomas Telford was like the Brunel.
Yeah.
Brunel was like Thomas Telford.
Yeah, you're right.
You've got to get that round the other way there.
We're Scots after all. We have to.
Telford was the Colossus of the North. Responsible, if you look at the map of Scotland, you can see all the way from Fort William right up to Inverness, the Caledonian Canal. And the canal itself is made up of 5 lochs, L-O-C-H. And I think it's at 28 locks, L-O-C-K-S.
Yes.
So it had 5 different lochs, including Loch Ness, which are all at different levels. And this guy in this early 1800s. Yeah.
Yeah, he was at. Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is about 1831 or something like that.
This build it during Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
And they didn't have computer-aided design. They didn't have all this facility, and yet he was able to raise and lower the water level of these lochs.
It was
a genius. An absolute genius.
And one of the things I liked, Joe, about him, he was offered a knighthood. And he refused it because he said, my identity is Mr. Thomas Telford, and I don't want to change that. And I thought, that's such a great thing. Now, we've got this church here. This church was built like in the 1860s, and it was built by a chap called John Henderson. And it's in what we call the English perpendicular style of architecture. It's a variation of Gothic. We can also call it Neo-Gothic because it's very spiky, as you can see, with all the zigzags. And this church was Episcopalian, and it was called the Holy Trinity Episcopalian Church.
That's right.
Was its original name. But then with the mass of churches, we had so many churches in Edinburgh, then it reverted to something else. In fact, in the 1950s, would you believe, it became an electricity substation. And I believe it maybe still is today that part of this church house an electricity.
Power of the Lord.
Yeah. But could we take a view over the side there? Because I think this is unexpected, Joe. You can see how far down it goes. And that is really unexpected. And a lot of the buildings in Edinburgh, and Joe was talking about this in the Rutland Square as well, you get the illusion that they're smaller than they actually are. But down there is the hall, the church hall, in the basement of the church down below there. And once again, it's because it's on the side of a cliff that it's got this this bit down there that you don't normally see to begin with. Yeah.
The Edinburgh architects really used the topography of the city to build into. I think it's always amazes me.
That's great.
Now, red doors, Mike. We often get asked about the red doors.
Yeah, on you go. Yeah.
Well, you see everywhere you go in Edinburgh, you'll see the red doors. Now, I've kind of done a wee bit of research into this, and I've still to find out the definitive answer. Some say it's to do with Passover, when they stained the doors red.
Yeah, yeah.
Some say it's to do with the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
And some say it's to do as a sign of refuge, because this was always just a place where you could use when you were looking for refuge. The red doors would offer it to you. But you will see red doors associated with churches all over Edinburgh, and I think all over Scotland. And it's now part of the Rima Church.
It's Pentecostal. Yeah.
It's a Pentecostal church, founded in South Africa.
Right,
I think there's one church here and one church further north in Kirkcaldy, in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah. So now we are coming down onto Queensferry Road, but if you notice these amazing terraces with the big bay windows, this was built on the lines of a French boulevard, because you've got the main thoroughfare going down the centre, but on either side you've got these grassy parkland areas. So if you look through the trees, you're enjoying the architecture with the landscape in front of them. So it's very, very beautiful. But of course, again, this was the Learmonth estates. John Learmonth, as we've talked about before, who made his money from coach building. In the 19th century, he engaged various people, architects and so on. We covered Rutland Square, and that was part of the Learmonth estates briefly before somebody else took ownership, and he had a favourite architect, and this architect was called John Tate. And if you remember Rutland Square, we talked about the Royal Institute of Architects in Scotland. It was a most beautiful, beautiful townhouse. Well, that same architect developed Eaton Terrace, where we're actually going down just now, and there's some fabulous architecture down here.
Now, I just checked out the price of a basement flat here, 2-bedroom basement flat, £1.2 million.
Yeah,
with access to,
that's just a basement.
That was the basement, and that's but access to your garden at the back as well. So we don't have a garden because a friend of mine bought one to got dogs and wanted the dogs to run around outside. 1.2 million for a dog kennel.
It's unbelievable. Now this is quite quirky and quite unusual for Edinburgh as we move down here. What we call a screen in architecture, and it has got these arches cut out of it. Now this could be built in this way for different reasons. It could be that the ground below was unsuitable for continuation of the buildings, to create symmetry, to create continuity, and it is quite delightful. It gives a really nice impression, but as you can see, a bit of restoration is happening at the moment, as often happens here with the sandstone.
And on the other side of this here are the mews where they kept the horses.
Yes.
So they've got the stables are all down here as well on the other side of this. So it could have been a good way to disguise
it. The
stables, yeah.
So you didn't see that other class. We're thinking about upstairs, downstairs.
They probably, as you're coming along here in your carriage, you didn't want to look down on where your equerry would be, or the stable boys and stable lads would be down there.
That's right.
So it could have just been a screen for vanity's purpose. I would like to find, if anybody knows otherwise, I'd really appreciate that,
Downton Abbey, if you know about that, the focus on the servants and that division between the family and the servants. In fact, Eaton Terrace, which this is, reminds me of the TV programme. Now this is going back a long time, called Upstairs Downstairs,
Downstairs.
because I believe it was Eaton Place.
Yeah.
Where they had their townhouse in London, so not so different, yeah.
But look at the difference. We've just walked 20 metres from
Yeah.
the main road, and we got birdsong.
It's beautiful.
You know, we've got the park across here. Again, this park is a you can be a member of this park. It's not private as such. Well,
Yeah.
it's private because you have to pay for it, but anybody can join it and get keys for the park.
I don't know if we can get a little look through the trees to give an impression to the viewers
But
of
the
how
tranquility is just amazing.
how
when
it
you just
is.
walk, you
Oh,
know.
it is, yeah. You know, when I'm picking people up sometimes as a driver guide, I sometimes come around here because many of these are Airbnbs.
Yeah.
Because what used to be wealthy family townhouses, they cannot afford to heat them, so they need to get extra money from rentals and so on as well. So there's a squirrel. I think there's a squirrel just going up the tree there.
Grey squirrel.
Yeah,
And there's a lovely little gardens down here.
yeah.
I mean, we are in the middle of the city, which is, you know, we still get the sirens.
That's the charm. The charm of Edinburgh
Yeah.
is that you get this bit of country, open space, as well as the residential architecture, the man-made environment as well. But some of these are really amazing, and if we look at the balconies as well.
So
yeah.
over on the other side, we were talking about these four sisters, the Stevenson sisters. And again, a lot of you do agree that spinster is such a horrible word. They've chosen to be single. Is the way I would refer to them, because it's just such one of these Victorian words that needs to change its meaning. Even the word bachelor is not, you know, what does that mean nowadays, you know?
No, it doesn't.
But there was another chap who lived in here, and his name is Saintbury, Saintbury. And he lived down here, and he was a professor at Edinburgh University. Just wanted to show you this little doorway here, because it's a lovely little door. To give you an insight.
It's got that stained glass, you know, again.
In there.
And the Sanderson house, which we covered when we did the Learmonth Estates, going back, I think, to a Christmas ago, had similar glass. It's very beautiful. Yeah.
So going back to this George Saintbury, he was a professor of English and rhetoric at Edinburgh University. He was born down south, and he came up here. He also wrote a lot in French, so he was a French writer. I'm trying to find a house that he was actually there. So he wrote a lot about French. So he was a linguist, writing both in English and French. And he was the complete opposite of the Stevenson sisters. Remember, they would have been contemporaneous for a while.
Yeah.
So you've got these four radical women who are all about social justice and social equality and bringing on the poor and education. Well, George Saintbury was the complete opposite. He was completely against anything to do with it. He died in the 1930s. He was a complete, absolute right-wing, into the empire, extreme right-wing views. George Orwell even wrote about him. He's mentioned in The Road to Wigan Pier. George Orwell actually called him out as being a self-confessed reactionary. So he was against everything that the women were doing. And I think because in the 1930s, because of the build-up of fascism and we had the brown shirts here and everything, I think he was quite dangerous at the time. You know, because he was a professor at the university, he was very influential. So topping and tail this little tour that we're doing, we've got the four sisters across the other side of the Dean River.
Yes.
All pushing for equality and pushing for bringing on people and helping the poor and being great philanthropists. And we had this guy here. Now, his house is... We'll walk back up the street because
we'll have another little look further up. Yeah.
So it's not Sainsbury. Don't get confused with Sainsbury. It's completely different. This is Saintbury, and but he was on the side of, you know, Tory. I mean, not even Tory. He was beyond Tory establishment, apparently. You know, but he's got a little plaque on one of these houses here. Unless somebody's taken it down in the past year or so.
Well, you see, they're doing that, which is very frustrating because they don't like people looking at the houses.
Yeah.
Which I suppose fair enough. You know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But he lived here in one of these grand houses. Now, he's also remembered for other things because he was what they call an eonophile, which he was a wine expert. And he also wrote a book about the history of the wine cellar, or the story of the wine cellar, or stories from the wine cellar. And he was really into his Pinot Noir and all the red wines. And about 10 years ago, I was in the Napa Valley in California. And there was a vineyard called Saintbury Vineyard. I mean, just sharing the name. But I think it was to do with the clubs, because since he wrote his book, there is a drinking club or a wine club where people, connoisseurs or eonophiles, can join, and it's called the Saintbury Club. So he's not only recognised for being a bit of a right-wing polemicist, I'm trying to be polite there, an ultra-right-wing polemicist.
Oh, yeah.
He was also remembered for his wine clubs.
Yeah.
And also, do you remember when we were doing Rutland Square, you mentioned the Scottish Arts Club that you're a member of?
Well, I'm not a member, but I could be a member.
Now you're backing off. You could be a member. Well, remember not to say to you, I would never join a club that would let me
take
in.
you in.
Yeah, I would never join a club that let Saintbury in either. So
no, I know, you got to watch what sort of clubs you join. Yeah.
So he lived in this area here. We'll try and find the house for you, but Lord Saintbury lived, George Saintbury, I don't think of lordship, lived in one of these houses here.
But tomorrow is very special in Scotland.
Tomorrow is indeed.
Because if you look at this, I hope you know what that is.
I think you better explain quickly.
It's a haggis. It's a traditional food, and it's made mainly of sheep. And it's all the bits that people would... I'm putting it down, but it's very tasty.
Let me stop you for a minute. Just to prove that I'm not making this up.
Oh, there it is. He's got
It's been carved. Professor George Saintbury lived here 1899 to 1915. And I want to finish off about him because I mentioned about the winery. I mentioned about his right-wing political views. He got mentioned about George Orwell. He moved from Edinburgh to Bath. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever been to Bath.
Oh yes, yeah.
There's a Royal Crescent.
Yeah,
the Royal Crescent. So if you're looking at the Royal Crescent, the last one on the right-hand side is open to the public, and it's been recreated for the period. That was his house.
Fantastic.
So Saintbury's house was given over to the nation. And now it's open to the public. So if you're ever in Bath and you want to go to that public building, which has all been recreated as it was in the day, then that's his.
It's like a townhouse, like Edinburgh.
It's a full
townhouse.
It's a full townhouse.
So you've seen the interior and how the people lived at the time.
So there's the connection with the girls, the ladies that lived across the other side of the river. We've got the Napa Valley Vinery. We've got a right-wing polemicist. We've got left social reformers on the other side. We've got connection with Bath.
Yeah.
Oh God, Mike, we are good.
They're almost shouting at each other, aren't they?
Yeah.
All these people.
So if you think that the nations are divided at the moment, and we're so binary at the moment, they were binary back in the Victorian period.
Oh gosh, I know. And this is Victorian terrace. This is all Victorian.
Yeah.
You're talking about later on in 1860s and beyond that. These houses were being built. But getting back to this...
Here we are. I did interrupt you a bit.
No, I think it's a good interruption. We've got this, and our traditional food, and it's made from minced meat, and the meat is from sheep or lamb, and it's the bits that normally people would throw away sometimes.
The offal,
and it's put together and stirred up and mixed in with oatmeal and various spices and so on, however you'd want to do it. And it's wrapped up in a sheep's stomach. Although this isn't a sheep's stomach, this is plastic, which is not very good in these days of the green economy, but we eat this tomorrow for Burns Night, which is the 25th of January, is the date that Robert Burns was born, our national poet. And if you want to enlarge on that, Joe.
Because you can also get venison haggis, you get vegan haggis, you get kosher haggis, all types of haggis. When I was at university, I might have told you this before, Mike, when I was at university, I had some friends who were Jewish, and we were invited by the rabbi to go along to the synagogue to
Yeah,
celebrate
yeah.
Burns Night, and they had the kosher haggis. But instead of calling it Rabbi Burns Night, they called it Rabbi Burns Night.
Yeah. Very inventive, very creative.
Very creative.
We've got St George's Dome Church behind us, which is one of my favourite bits of architecture. In fact, I'm doing a watercolour based on that church just now, which I love. So here are my pipes, and they are not Highland bagpipes, they are Lowland, like Scottish Borders tradition.
Borders pipes,
And of
okay.
course we know that Robert Burns was very familiar with the border area, so perhaps the sound might have been more his sort of thing. It's a big ceremony at the beginning of a Burns supper where you produce this haggis, it gets piped in, and then great ceremony, a big poem, a big long poem is said, and then they finally cut the haggis, and it's served up, and it's whiskey is a traditional accompaniment now.
And take a bow.
We got there at the end.
He's here all week, ladies and gentlemen. He's here all week. Thank you, Edinburgh.
I hope you enjoyed that. I just tell you the tunes. The first tune I played was called Loch Duich.
Loch Duich.
The second tune I played was I'll Gang Nae Mair to Yon Tune, which is by Robert Burns. And
Translate that to English. I'll
I'll-
gang nae where.
I'll gang-
nae mair to
I'll go
yon.
no more to that town.
Good. Yeah.
And the last one was A Man's a Man for All That, which is a traditional tune that pipers play when they're leading the haggis at a Burns supper. So we got there eventually, haggis in the pocket, bagpipes, or rather Scottish small pipes here, and it's getting really cold, so
Scottish small pipe on a cold afternoon.
it's a cold
Got
afternoon.
big rounds of applause there, Mike. So that's grand.
Thanks very much for watching.
Thanks very much for everybody, and have a happy Burns Night tomorrow if you're celebrating Burns Night. And we'll see you next week.
See you next
Take
week.
care.
All the
and
best.
enjoy.
Bye
Bye-bye.
for now. Bye.